I was seated at the end of the table, so close to the kitchen door, I could hear the clash of silverware louder than any welcome, laughter curling around me like smoke while they toasted each other's promotions. No one daring to say my name, someone even raising a glass with that smug tilt and saying, "Well, at least she's here, now scrubbing floors instead of files." I didn't flinch. I just chewed silence, fork hitting the plate like a quiet verdict, remembering missions no one mentioned anymore. Times I saved what they now praise her for. A cracked wine glass catching the light and splitting my reflection in two, feeling my own breath stall. Then the door swung open. A man in a black suit stopped short, eyes widening in disbelief. Voice lifting enough to slice through the hush. "Ma'am, federal agent." The air hardened, forks frozen mid-air, their practiced smiles slipping. "Before I share my story, I want to know you're here with me. Just say hi in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. And if this story moves something in you, consider subscribing." I sat at the far end of the table, my chair too close to the kitchen door, so every time it swung, I felt the cold draft hit my ankles, the smell of roasted lamb and stale dishwater, mixing in the air while the chandelier spilled soft yellow light that made their faces glow like wax figures in a museum I wasn't invited to. Voices layered over one another in warm, practiced laughter that never reached me, glass clinks far down the table like distant bells, and I found myself tracing the crack in my wine glass with my thumb, watching it catch the flickering light in a way that felt too familiar. Someone said my name, but it didn't sound like mine. The syllables clipped and bright, meant to prove they remembered without caring if I answered. My mother's perfume drifted ahead of her, that heavy floral she wore for appearances, stinging my nose before her fingers even brushed my shoulder. She smiled in that cold way that asked me to behave without saying it, turned before I could speak. A cousin leaned over, offered a bland "How are you?" that was already moving past me before the question finished. Their eyes slid off like rain on glass. Camille sat further down, framed in the richest light, laughing easily. Every word she spoke carried on the hush of the room like gospel. They toasted to her new role, glasses lifted in ritual, forks paused mid-air, as if to honor her ascension. I watched their heads turn toward her, all those careful, expectant faces shining approval she wore, like a crown. I felt my fingers tighten around the stem of my glass, until the chill seeped into my palm. No one asked what I'd been doing. No one mentioned me at all. I tried to speak once, leaning forward as if I could catch their attention, but my voice died when another story took over, louder, funnier, meant for them. I closed my mouth slowly, settling back into the shadow, where the chandelier couldn't reach, the polished wood reflecting everyone but me. A spoon fell somewhere behind me with a sharp, metallic note, but no one turned. I watched the server stoop to pick it up, while the conversation surged on untouched. I pressed my fork against the plate, listening to the soft scrape, willing it to drown the restless breath that caught in my chest. Around me, the walls were lined with family photos in neat frames, glass polished to gleaming, Camille in half of them, always posed just right. My own reflection flickered in the wine, a stranger's silhouette with hollow eyes. I let my fingers go slack around the glass, exhaling slow enough not to be heard, watching them lean in closer to each other, warm in the glow that refused to touch me. I sat at the edge of the long table, where the light didn't quite reach, the chandelier's reflection pooling in uneven streaks across polished wood that stopped just short of me, leaving my place in a soft, unclaimed shadow. I could see the old family photos along the wall, frames gleaming with care, each grouping arranged so perfectly it hurt to stare, faces tilted just right, hands resting on shoulders that were no longer mine to claim. My place in those lineups was gone, the gap filled in with someone else's shape, the image complete without needing me. The air held that mix of lemon oil on old furniture and the sweetness of overdone candles, scenting the room like memory forced polite. Someone set down a tray of bread I'd brought, still wrapped, and nudged it to the side, so the silver platter of store-bought rolls could sit centered. I watched the paper crinkle beneath a stranger's hand, as if the homemade was an embarrassment no one wanted to name. When the conversation rose in laughter, it rippled down the table in gentle waves that broke before reaching my end, leaving only the sound of a spoon stirring tea offbeat, the scrape oddly loud before it fell silent. Someone tried to include me, their voice too bright, calling me by a name that wasn't mine exactly, enough to show they didn't remember. The apology was a short laugh, the kind meant to move things along, and another voice picked up before I could correct them, praising someone else for organizing tonight, handing credit away like passing salt, never glancing my way. I looked at my mother's face as she smiled at them, that perfume still sharp in my nose, her hand smoothing the tablecloth near her plate, but never reaching for mine. I adjusted my napkin twice, folding the corner with careful fingers no one watched, tracing the damp ring my glass left on the linen, and wiping it away like it hadn't happened. When I leaned forward slightly to speak, the moment narrowed without me. The topic turned before I finished drawing breath, words dying in the warmth between other people's laughter. I leaned back, the chair creaking, and felt the cold from the window behind me pressing against my back, a slow chill that kept me anchored in silence. My fingers tightened around the glass stem until I felt it cool under my skin. But I didn't lift it. The reflection in the wine's dark surface caught only my mouth pressed thin, my eyes cast down. When someone made a toast, the clink of crystal scattered through the room, soft and polite, but no one turned to see if I joined in. I shifted just enough to watch the light gutter in the candles closer to them, while the one by me barely flickered at all, the wick too short, the flame low and struggling. The last thing I noticed before I let my gaze fall to the floor was the scrape of a chair leg across polished wood, quiet but clear, someone leaning in toward Camille while I sat unmoving, my hand resting flat on the table, feeling the faint tremor in my wrist, waiting for a word that didn't come. Chat kipti, doga noi. I watched her standing at the far end of the table, the chandelier's glow wrapping around her, like it had been designed for just that spot, highlighting the fall of her hair, the precise tilt of her shoulders, as she accepted another compliment with that careful, grateful smile. She didn't have to do much. The room did the work for her, everyone leaning in, faces turned, attention pooling at her feet in gentle waves that lapped past mine without ever touching. My own chair felt angled away, not by design, just by quiet repetition over years, enough that I could see them all without them seeing me. They clapped twice, once when she recounted something small she'd organized, a task so familiar I could have named every step, but no one asked me to. The second applause rose softer, but with real warmth, the words of praise repeating her name like it had a new shine no one else had managed to polish before. My mother smiled across at her, slow and approving, fingers tapping the stem of her glass in time with the others. And when someone called her remarkable, I watched my father nod, like it was a fact that had always been true. The sound of silver hitting porcelain punctuated a quiet pause. The ring clear as a bell, and in that hush, someone filled in her story for her, embellishing small details she didn't correct. I could almost see my own voice in the air, forming a shape that never made it out, the words resting behind my teeth, heavy and unwelcome. I touched the base of my glass without lifting it, feeling the cold soak into my palm, the sweat gathering beneath my fingers, and I focused on that, on the steady chill that didn't ask anything of me. She moved just slightly, enough to cast a clear shadow against the wall behind her, clean and unbroken, while mine disappeared behind the tall back of a chair and the clustered stems of candle holders that threw my shape in broken slices. I shifted once, meaning to lean in, to add something, anything, but the conversation was already curving away, warm and low, catching her laughter and carrying it forward like a gift. I let my breath ease out instead, chest barely moving, listening to the scrape of a fork in the next pause. My fingers adjusted the edge of my napkin once, twice, smoothing it flat with care that no one watched, and when the toast was made again, her name spoken clear and sure, I flinched so little I hoped no one saw. The light caught in my glass, fractured it into soft colors that didn't reach my face, and I stared at it as if it would say something for me. Behind the rim, I watched her nod, humble, perfect, the glow settling over her while the rest of the room blurred and hummed and clapped. I let my hand rest on the table, skin cooling, breath quiet, eyes fixed on the warped reflection in the polished surface, seeing myself like a ghost pressed flat and silent. I shifted forward a little, fingers resting on the rim of my glass as if steadying a thought before it tipped out, my eyes catching on the edge of a photo tucked behind a cluster of bottles on the sideboard, an old scene I remembered better than I wanted. I started to say something about that day, about the time we all gathered before dinner and someone forgot the rolls in the oven, and how I'd pulled them out smoking, waving away the alarm as everyone laughed. My mouth curved, slow, like it wasn't sure it was allowed to smile yet, and I felt the words lining up in my throat with a fragile kind of hope. But before I could finish, someone on the other side of the table let out a sharp laugh that cracked the hush, tipping back in their chair as they recounted something Camille had said earlier in the kitchen. The sound of her name bounced twice, once in the echo of the chandelier glass, once in the quiet admiration that settled in. Forks clinked against plates. The conversation folded over my voice like a sheet smoothed across an unmade bed, hiding the crease. I caught the moment slipping away while my mouth was still part open, the sentence raw at the back of my tongue. I closed it slowly, teeth clicking quiet as I sat back, letting my hand drop from the glass to the table's edge where it found the seam in the linen. I traced that line, pressing it flat, again and again, with the pad of my finger, while my gaze skated over the heads bent toward her, the light gathering in the middle of the table where she spoke in that calm, practiced hush that drew them in. No one turned my way. I let my eyes wander to the candle beside me, the flame too short to throw much light, its glow pooling on the base without reaching my hand. For breath I considered leaning in again, drawing them back, but my shoulders stayed angled away. My other hand curled slow in my lap, gathering the fold of my napkin into a tight little bud before smoothing it flat again, as if erasing the movement. When someone asked for the story to be retold, her story, they lifted their glasses in another quiet salute, and I watched them meet eyes over the rims while I let mine fall to the table. I didn't say anything else. I sat there with my mouth closed, feeling the words dry up behind my teeth, eyes resting on the dark swirl of wine that held no reflection of me. The last thing I remember was the sound of my own breath pushing out too carefully, like I could make myself silent enough to disappear, while the laughter skipped over me, light and effortless, filling the space I hadn't managed to claim. I watched them raise their glasses to her again, the rim of crystal catching the chandelier light just right, sending small bursts across the table, as if she were the reason for the glow itself. The words drifted over in soft claps and smiles. "She's really remarkable. I don't think I've ever seen anyone handle it so well." It wasn't even shouted, just spoken with a calm surety of truth. Chairs leaned in closer, the space between people narrowing around her, drawing in the heat and brightness that seemed to miss my side of the table entirely. I adjusted my seat slightly, trying not to scrape the floor, but no one looked over. My fingers toyed with the stem of my glass without lifting it, the wine reflecting her face clearer than mine in the curve. I could hear them listing things she'd done, the details rolling out in a practiced ease, as if they'd rehearsed the lines, every mention of her name a gentle pat on the shoulder she didn't have to ask for. I felt something shift in my chest, quiet and hard to name, like pressing on an old bruise just to see if it still hurt. I kept my gaze on her a moment too long, tracing the way her laugh softened her face, how she glanced down as if embarrassed at the praise, earning more of it for being humble. There was a time I might have laughed like that here, leaning forward to catch every word, but now the table felt too long, the centerpiece too high, blocking sightlines I didn't want to admit I missed. My mouth opened once, without words, only to shut around a breath that didn't need to be said. Someone remembered a story about last year's event, and for a heartbeat I waited for my name in the retelling, some small anchor of memory. But the sentence curved away without it, laughter blooming around a punchline that didn't need me. I watched the ripple of amusement spread, lighting faces I knew better than they remembered, and felt myself drawing back an inch at a time, shoulders dropping, breath quieting so it wouldn't disturb the ease of their moment. I let my eyes wander down the length of the table, following the light to where it fell brightest, casting her shadow sharp and clean on the wall. Mine disappeared under the table edge, folded up in the legs of chairs and the drape of the cloth. I let my thumb press into the condensation on my glass, watching it leave a clear smudge. I wiped slowly away. When they called her name to toast again, voices warm and easy, I looked down at the pale wood floor beneath me, studying the way the light broke against it, nowhere near my feet. I sat back just enough to see the whole table, without being in it, watching the way light pooled around their plates, glinted on the curve of polished forks, scattered in small sparks where crystal met crystal in unhurried toasts. Laughter swelled and settled like breathing, never really stopping, only changing shape depending on who spoke. No one noticed the pause in my place setting, the untouched wine, the way my napkin rested too neatly beside my empty hand. Someone leaned in closer to Camille, voice warm and low, their eyes soft with a shared memory I couldn't hear from where I sat. I let my gaze blur for a moment, taking in the overlapping voices, the hush of polite listening, the small hush that followed every compliment, like the moment before a bow. I didn't try to add anything. The words in my mouth felt heavy, like they had edges. Instead, I exhaled carefully, as if the air itself might make a sound I didn't want to explain. My fingers found the edge of my napkin, folding it once, then twice, pressing the seam flat, before laying it gently on the plate. I hesitated with my palm resting there, a slow drift of indecision that even I couldn't quite name. When I finally pulled my hand away, it was with deliberate softness, careful not to knock anything askew. The chair creaked as I shifted forward, then back, before I gathered my coat from the back of it, in one slow motion. I paused, fingers sliding into the sleeve, thumb brushing the lining like it might catch on something and hold me there. For a breath I waited. No one looked up. The room was full of sound, but none of it bent my way. I felt the moment pass like a tide going out, leaving me standing dry on the floor no one needed to cross. Standing fully, I pushed the chair in with the heel of my hand, watching it settle flush to the table's edge, perfect and undisturbed. My other hand brushed the back of it once more, like smoothing the memory of my presence from the wood. I stepped back without a sound, the clack of my shoes on tile, muffled by the thick rug, letting the laughter wash past me in steady waves. As I turned, I caught the edge of a frame on the wall, a family photo where the light struck the glass just enough to show the faces clear, save the one corner where it turned dark in the angle, my reflection gone before I could claim it. The door opened with the faintest sigh of hinges, light from the hallway cooler and flatter than the glow behind me. I slipped through sideways, letting the coat fall around my shoulders, and didn't look back to see the space I'd left behind. The chair, now a perfect part of the arrangement again, only empty. I stayed just outside the circle of light, fingers resting on the doorway, watching Camille tuck a napkin's corner under a fork with the kind of patient precision that used to earn me teasing. She didn't seem to mind the eyes on her. Instead, she leaned in to adjust a candle, smile bending soft, and my mother's voice rose clear, thanking her for the extra effort. No one laughed at the perfectionism this time. It was charming, they said. Thoughtful. She was already turning toward the group before they even called her name twice, like she'd learned the timing, folding into the center of the photo with that easy tilt of the head that caught the chandelier light. My father placed a hand on her shoulder. The camera flash caught the silver in his hair and the warmth on her face. My own shape reflected in the buffet glass behind them. blurred by bevels, the edges gone soft, colors wrong. I heard my uncle's voice telling a story I knew too well. The one about the first time the family tried that dish and someone burned the rolls. They were already laughing when he credited her with the save. She dipped her head, shaking it in gentle protest while my mother reached over to squeeze her hand. I pressed mine to the side of my skirt, brushing at lint that wasn't there, feeling the fabric give, but not smooth. Camille shifted along the table, refilling glasses with a small joke here and there that made them tip their heads back, open and easy. My mother watched her move, nodding along, eyes soft. I remembered the quiet talks I used to have in that exact spot. My shoulder turned just so, my head dipped to catch words meant for me alone. When someone gestured for me to join them in another photo, I hesitated, hand half lifting, then lowered it without a word. The invitation didn't repeat. They turned back to her, arranging their faces, the space closing in without leaving a gap for mine. I shifted my foot back on the rug, letting the fibers catch at the sole of my shoe so the motion made no sound. My eyes landed on the old frame above the sideboard, a photo from years ago where I stood in the middle, arms braced around shoulders that leaned in. I remembered giving directions for that one, telling them to move closer, to look natural, to smile. My mouth curved now without meaning it, the shape broken halfway, the rest lost in breath. I watched her tilt her head toward my father, laugh spilling in just the right measure, the camera ready to catch it all. My reflection met hers in the hallway mirror, her face crisp and certain, mine diffused by the glare, edges dissolving into the dark trim, mouth parting on the first half of a thought that never finished. I sat apart from the laughter, back straight but shoulders tight, fingers resting on my knee like they weren't sure where else to be. From the dining room came the sound of silverware, punctuated by polite laughter that rose and fell in practiced waves. My name hadn't been spoken in hours. A server passed through the hall, tray balanced with the ease of long practice. But he hesitated, eyes meeting mine with a flicker of surprise that softened into something more respectful. He adjusted his grip and asked, low and careful, "Would you like anything else, Mom?" I blinked, mouth opening before closing again on a small breath. He waited just a beat too long, enough to feel like seeing me was intentional, before moving on. I let my gaze wander to the sideboard, where an old photograph sat, in a heavy frame. The glass caught the room behind me, blurring Camille's face into mine, our outlines layered and shifting with the angle. I remembered the day it was taken, me standing too straight, hands anchored on my mother's shoulder, while she smiled only after she'd approved the composition. A child wandered out from the dining room, crumbs on her fingers. She paused in front of me, head tilted, eyes squinting in curious recognition. "Are you the lady in the picture?" she asked, voice clear and without malice. My mouth shaped a half answer that never found voice. She didn't seem to mind. She just watched me for a moment longer, then gave a small, certain nod, and turned back to the room that would welcome her without question. I shifted, fingers brushing the armrest like I might stand, then resting back. A man I didn't know well, someone's friend or partner, passed next, slowed just enough to incline his head with a quiet nom that felt out of place here. Not mocking, just the smallest edge of respect that cut deeper than anything loud could have. The word hung in the air long after he left, a hush that felt oddly full. I let my chest rise slow, fall even slower. Inside the dining room, Camille laughed at something, the sound easy and round. My mother's voice folded over hers, praising her thoughtfulness. My eyes lowered to the cup of tea at my side, untouched all night. I lifted it by the handle, feeling the residual warmth slip into my fingers. I held it there just long enough to notice the weight, before setting it back carefully, letting the porcelain kiss the saucer with the gentlest sound. I didn't smile, but I let my shoulders ease back, the tension giving way to something quiet. Not triumph, not reclamation, just a small space that felt like mine, unremarkable but unchallenged, where I could breathe without asking. I saw him before he even looked my way, though I couldn't be sure he actually did. He stood propped against the doorway, elbow crooked, hand tucked into the inside of his jacket like he needed something to hold in place. His head inclined as someone laughed nearby. Eyes creased just enough to read sincere, mouth pulling up on one side the way I remembered. Controlled but warm enough to be inviting. They faced him like flowers tracking light, leaning in for a word, a glance, anything. He didn't have to try. They filled the silence for him. I'd once been so careful with my own pauses, measuring them to match his, hoping my quiet would be heard the same way. My fingers flexed at my side and settled again, smoothing the seam of my dress. He turned just enough that our eyes might have met if he'd let them. But he didn't. His gaze hovered, then moved past, polite as a stranger on the street. I let the breath I'd held slip out slow, so no one would hear. There was his laugh, that low, quiet kind that felt like an invitation. It had always made me feel singled out, chosen. Hearing it now was like standing outside a warm room, watching everyone else welcomed in. I caught a flicker of memory, the slow nod he gave me once, final and small. Permission not to speak again. I couldn't remember the words but remembered the silence that followed, hard and cold as the floor under my feet. He shifted then, thumb rolling along a cufflink in one careful stroke. The gesture was precise, finished. I felt my chest tighten at the familiarity of it, the easy signal that he was done without having to say so. Someone called his name. He smiled, wide enough to share, controlled enough to keep. Laughter came from the group around him, gentle and quick, nothing forced. His eyes flicked across the room but passed over me, like a gap in the wall, a place you didn't put furniture. I didn't step closer. I stayed on the threshold where carpet met wood, a border only I felt. My thumb traced the fabric again, slow, like pressing a seal closed. He leaned in toward someone's comment, brow lifted in that open, generous way. My mouth felt dry. I swallowed carefully. Watching him listen like that had once felt like watching something bloom. Now, it was just rote. I let my gaze drift down to the floor between us. The space was small, but felt vast enough to echo. I saw the scuffs in the finish, places we'd once stood close enough to share air, elbow to elbow. I didn't move right away. My fingers lifted, twitched, fell back. My shoulders dropped, not in surrender but in relief at not holding them so stiff. I breathed in once, held it, let it go, careful not to tremble. My eyes traced the grain of the wood. Then I turned, slow, deliberate, fabric shifting against my legs. I didn't look back at him. I didn't hope for my name. His laughter continued behind me, easy and light, welcoming the people who'd stayed. The room didn't hush when I walked away. The light didn't shift. I let the silence grow between each step, listening to the hush of my own breath. The door clicked shut behind me without force, like closing a room no one else remembered I'd once called mine. I stepped in slowly, letting the door drift shut behind me with barely a sound. The room looked just as it always had, nothing out of place, but I felt like a guest who hadn't been invited. The long table gleamed, polished to a shine I remembered working for hours to maintain, my fingers once raw from rubbing at small imperfections. No one else noticed. Tonight, the surface was flawless, lit in warm pools by the overhead chandelier, reflections of crystal glassware, throwing light like tiny fireworks. My chair at the head of the table was taken. I watched from the threshold as someone else leaned back against the carved wood, elbow resting with easy confidence on the armrest I'd once claimed as mine without thinking. They didn't look uncomfortable. They didn't shift or adjust. They simply fit. Their voice rose above the others. Not too loud, not too soft, just enough to draw attention. A laugh followed from those gathered, the kind that comes from people leaning in, wanting to be included. No one glanced at me, standing just outside the circle of light. I stepped forward once, feeling the edge of the carpet catch at my shoe. It hadn't been replaced. My heel scuffed over the same worn line I remembered pacing over so many nights, trying to find the right words, the right tone. No one else noticed. Their hand lifted a decanter, the old one with the tiny chip at the lip I used to hide, by turning it just so. They didn't bother. They poured with steady ease, the wine falling in a perfect ribbon, their other hand resting light on the table I'd picked for its grain. Someone called their name. Clearly. Twice even, to make sure they heard. The sound bounced off the walls, filling the space I used to think held my voice. I brushed my hand along the back of a chair as I passed, feeling the polish, the curve I'd insisted was more comfortable. No one noticed me stop. They lifted their glass in a toast. The others followed instantly. I watched arms raise in unison, the clink of crystal meeting crystal sounding like a door shutting. My fingers tightened around the stem of the glass I still held, the chill biting into my skin. I didn't lift it. I caught my reflection in the dark window behind them, just the outline of my shoulder and the pale line of my cheek. No light caught me. The chandelier burned overhead for them, not me. My breath left me slow. I felt my shoulders lower. The laughter softened, turned intimate, drawing them closer together in a huddle of shared memory I was no longer part of. My eyes landed on the napkin, folded at the head of the table. The perfect square I'd taught them to make, corners aligned like a promise. It looked better now than it ever had under my hands. I let my hand fall to my side, fingers brushing against the fabric of my skirt, unmoving. They didn't pause for me. No silence fell. No head turned. I stepped back once. Not far enough to leave, but enough to see the whole scene at once. The light bathed them in gold. No shadow fell for me to step into. I let my eyes drop to the floor, tracing the edge of the rug, seeing where it had been shifted to hide the old stain. I didn't straighten. I didn't clear my throat. I simply turned away. And when I left, the laughter stayed right where it was. I sat further back than I used to, the edge of the gathering where light turned soft and lost its certainty. The air smelled of old polish and wilted flowers, heavy with the hush that comes before someone takes the microphone. I could feel the weight of my own breathing. A voice rose, measured and pleasant, bouncing gently off high ceilings, thanking everyone for their part, describing late nights of planning, tireless dedication, careful arrangements to make this place feel welcoming. I felt my shoulders lift before I could stop them, spine drawing tall as though waiting for my name to puncture the hush. But they said someone else's. Clear and deliberate. The details matched mine perfectly. The way the seating was designed to avoid conflict, the subtle color palette chosen to soothe, the attention to each invitation so no one felt an afterthought. I felt the heat in my palms even as they rested calmly on my knees. Applause rippled out instantly, warm and certain, wrapping the room in approval I couldn't join. I blinked once, twice. My eyes stung at the edges but didn't blur. Their name repeated over the sound system, firm, impossible to mishear. I listened as they accepted the credit. A shy nod, an awkward laugh, so humble, so willing to receive what wasn't theirs. In the front, someone turned. Just briefly. Their eyes met mine like an accident, like a door cracking on a secret no one wanted to say out loud. I watched them swallow words they didn't plan to speak, their face tightening before they looked away, settling back into the polite crowd. I couldn't see much of myself in the polished silver at my place, just a warped outline. My fingers curled around the edge of the napkin on my lap, feeling the fabric crease under my grip. I smoothed it out slowly, pretending care instead of need. The voice at the microphone went on, details tumbling out one by one, like coins on marble. Each sounded like me, but not for me. The applause that followed hit my ears in measured bursts. Clinical, nothing personal. I adjusted the glass in front of me, hearing it tap the tablecloth softly. No one heard that sound but me. Someone up front laughed, warm, invited in. I didn't lift my gaze. I sat there still, breathing carefully through my nose. I let my mouth part just enough to release the thinnest line of air, unvoiced. The lights didn't move. No one turned back. No one called my name. I slipped out through the side door without needing to push hard. It swung just enough for me to pass, closing behind me with a hush that swallowed the echo of laughter. No one saw. No one called my name. My feet pressed slow against stone. I could hear my own shoes more clearly than the party behind me. Outside, the air felt thinner. Not cold, just different. Honest in a way the bright-lit dining room wasn't. The breeze picked at my hair, small tugs like it wanted me to look around. I didn't hurry. I didn't shiver. I just walked until the noise behind the glass turned into muffled shapes of conversation, music leaking like water through a crack in the wall. I paused at the railing. Let my fingers rest there, just enough to feel the metal cool my skin. A single breath. My shoulders didn't slump, but they didn't stay straight anymore. I didn't have to hold myself up for anyone out here. My chest fell with the exhale, slow and silent. Through the glass doors I could see them. Everyone in their places, leaning in, trading smiles that caught the chandelier light. Forks lifted in rhythm. The collective nods of agreement, the timed bursts of laughter. The shape of a family that didn't notice a gap. I didn't knock. Didn't tap the glass. I stood where I was, arms resting at my sides, breathing in the scent of night air. The grass had that damp sweetness after being trampled. Far away a car door closed. A dog barked, distant and half-hearted. I listened to the real world. Softer, less certain, more true. My reflection in the window didn't hold steady. It blurred whenever someone moved behind the glass, as if they kept pushing me out of frame without meaning to. I let them. I blinked once. Twice. My eyes didn't sting. I wasn't crying. I turned my head to see how far the balcony went. Not far. Just enough room for me and the wind. I gripped the railing once, then let go. My palm remembered the shape of it even after I pulled away. Inside, a new song started. The bass was muffled, but strong. People clapped along. I watched the rhythm of their movements but felt none of it. My body found its own slower time. I inhaled deeply. Let the air move my ribs without asking permission. No one missed me. I didn't want them to. That was the point. To be outside of that frame. To see the life going on without a place carved out for me. My feet shifted once, settling onto the ground like roots. I didn't plan anything. Didn't rehearse a speech, or imagine their faces turning an apology. I just let the quiet in. Let it fill places words used to press too tight. The wind caught a loose strand of hair, brushed it across my mouth. I didn't move it away. I let it fall back on its own. The door behind me stayed closed. No creak, no steps, no voice calling me back. My fingers lifted slightly, hovered in the air, then settled back at my side. I didn't even hear myself sigh, but I felt it. A low, final push of breath that left space behind it. I stayed there. Not gone. Just not theirs anymore. I stepped out slowly. The door creaked just enough to announce my exit before falling silent behind me, leaving the laughter sealed inside. My shoes scuffed softly on the concrete as the night air met me, not cold, but carrying a breeze that tugged loose strands of hair across my cheek. I didn't move to fix them. I let them fall where they wanted, a thin veil I could hide behind without anyone noticing. The porch light cast a dull halo on the floorboards, weak and uneven, more shadow than illumination. I didn't belong to that light. I shifted just outside its reach, enough to feel the chill settle over my arms. My fingers grazed the old railing, chipped paint rough under my nails. I rested there, breathing slow, letting the world contract to the scrape of my shoes and the faint whine of wind around the corner of the house. Inside, the party pressed on without a hitch. I watched through the glass door. The dining room glowed, Laughter swelling and breaking like surf. Voices tripping over each other with half-sincere toasts. Chairs scraped back, silverware chimed. Not one pause. Not one head turned. I wasn't missed. I could see it clear through the glass. My seat had been filled without hesitation. They leaned in close, shoulders touching, trading secrets I'd stopped being worthy of hearing. I didn't knock. Didn't clear my throat. Just stood there watching them like a ghost learning the art of silence. My breath fogged against the glass before fading to nothing. I shifted weight to my other foot, slow enough it felt like yielding. My hand fell from the rail to my side, fingers brushing my skirt to feel something solid, real. A breeze stirred again. Caught the hem of my dress, lifted it just enough to make me aware of the cold. I inhaled deeper, forcing air to fill places inside me I'd let shrink all night. Exhaled through my nose, quiet. Like I didn't want even the wind to hear. My reflection caught in the glass was pale, indistinct. A shape without features. Their light fell past me, through me, and onto the yard beyond. I turned slightly, enough to let it go. No one inside knew. No one inside cared to know. I let my gaze fall to the ground, to the line of bricks cracked and moss-filled at the step's edge. The old threshold I'd crossed so many times, now just a border I didn't need to test. I didn't feel like arguing with it. I swallowed, dry, and felt my shoulders lower. No more tension in my spine to hold me straight for anyone's approval. My fingers twitched at my side before settling. Another gust moved past, cooler now, lifting hair from my neck. I didn't fight it. I closed my eyes. I didn't pray. Didn't beg. Didn't even think of going back in. I simply let my breath slow, until it was quiet enough that I could hear the laughter fade to a muffled hum behind the door, a sound for someone else's life. I let it be. I didn't move when the hush settled. Someone dropped a fork, and the scrape was too loud in the sudden quiet. My name wasn't spoken, but a different word hung in the air. One no one was sure they'd heard right. A waiter froze beside me, eyes darting to the badge in his hand. Realizing, handed it back face up. Not a guest pass. Not a +1 card. Something official. My photograph. My title. The seal in clear relief, even in the dim light. He stammered. Ma'am? It wasn't the name they used for me here. It wasn't the tone they saved for the disappointment at the end of the table. Voices died. A conversation about a wedding plan cut off mid-sentence. A champagne flute set down too hard. I heard the click against marble like a shot. No one spoke, but chairs creaked as bodies leaned back, eyes narrowing, refocusing. I felt the weight shift around me. Not mine. I hadn't changed. I was still slouched, fingers draped around the base of my glass, half warm with neglect. But the air thickened. The cloying sweetness of candle smoke twisted. I watched it coil in the stale hush. Someone cleared their throat. Another stole a glance at me and away again. An aunt who hadn't said my name in years adjusted her pearls, eyes on my badge, pupils tightening. No one asked for details. No one dared. They all understood enough. I didn't reach for the badge. Didn't snatch it back. My hand stayed on the table, open. I didn't offer a correction, an explanation, a claim. I let them see it as long as they needed. One cousin who once called me invisible looked like he'd bite through his lip. He exhaled too sharply, trying to hide the tremor in his fingers when he picked up his drink. The toast he was about to give died behind his teeth. Someone muttered my rank. Not even my name, under breath. That was enough. I didn't react. Didn't nod. Didn't shift. My back stayed straight for the first time all night. My gaze lifted from the glass to the room itself. I met eyes, one by one, until they dropped theirs. They weren't laughing now. No one offered an apology. None would. It wasn't that kind of family. But they wouldn't forget. I didn't need to speak. The hush did it for me. My glass trembled when I finally picked it up. I set it down deliberately. Slow enough that they saw I wasn't hiding the shake, wasn't denying it either. Light pooled across the table, highlighting my hand in relief. The badge caught it too, reflected it in a dull metallic gleam. They watched that light. Watched me. Waited for me to say something to make it go away. I didn't. I breathed. Sat back. Held their gaze until it broke. And in the silence that rushed in to fill the space, I stayed exactly where I was. Not shrinking. Not apologizing. Just here. Their eyes told me what their mouths wouldn't. They'd seen enough to know. And for the first time tonight, I didn't need them to say it. I stood up, without announcing it. The chair moved back just enough for the legs to scrape. Quiet, but deliberate. A signal, without being a threat. I didn't wait for anyone to help me gather my things. A folded napkin slid from my lap to the table edge, resting there, like a final word that needed no voice. No one blocked me. They adjusted subtly, parting like the sea before a calm tide. A cousin who used to speak over me shifted his gaze to his drink. An uncle who had once corrected my every move now pretended to listen to someone else. Even the chatter hushed a fraction, not out of fear, but because the air had grown aware of itself. Someone tried to say my name. It came out softer, almost respectful, but they couldn't finish the syllable. The sound died in their throat. I turned just enough to acknowledge it without offering my eyes, a silent boundary they all understood. One hand smoothed my jacket as I prepared to move, fingers pressing a crease back into place that felt like the line between my old role and this new silence. They watched without words. I felt it on the back of my neck. A shift in temperature, a pulling back of judgment that had once been so free-flowing. They weren't ready to apologize, but they knew. The room exhaled slowly, as if to say, "This was always yours. We just pretended it wasn't." I didn't claim anything. My mouth stayed closed, shoulders steady. No victory speech. No forgiveness issued or asked. I simply turned away from the table, leaving behind a small square of cloth folded into itself. It lay there with the precision of a verdict. As I walked, I heard the scrape of another chair being righted, the tink of a fork set carefully on porcelain. Conversations restarted, but they were hushed, glancing at me in intervals, then away when I met their eyes. A server who had once been told to ignore me stepped back as I passed, eyes flicking up to my face, then down again with something like respect. There was no apology offered, no explanation demanded. Only the quiet concession that when I chose to go, no one had the authority to make me stay. And that was enough. Near the door, I paused, adjusted my collar, looked back just once, not at anyone in particular, but at the space I'd occupied, the seat now empty, the napkin resting untouched. It was still mine. Always had been. The difference was, I didn't need to fight for it anymore. Someone whispered something behind me. A name. Maybe mine. But I didn't turn to confirm it. I kept moving. Outside, the night was windless, the heavy drapes at the window unmoving, but inside, I felt the shift. A hush that held more weight than any cheer. Because dignity doesn't require applause. It only asks you to know when to stand up and leave, so everyone remembers who you are without you needing to say it.